Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We are diving in about habits, how those patterns of behavior shape your days, your health, your relationship, and your sense of capacity and possibility. It's something that affects every single area of your life, whether you realize it or not. And what I want you to know right from the start, if you've ever felt like you can't stick to anything, like change is too hard, like you're somehow broken because you keep falling back into old patterns, it's not about you being flawed. It's maybe about how you've been taught to approach change. So today we're exploring what the research tells us about how habits form, how they're maintained, and how we can work with our nervous systems instead of against them to create sustainable, lasting change. Let's start by taking a breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice that you're here, you're present, open to learning something that could shift how you move through your life. The science of habit formation has evolved so much in recent years. We understand now that habits aren't just about willpower or discipline in the way that we've been told. They're about brain patterns, environmental cues, nervous system states. They're about repetition and context, consistency over intensity, and working with your body's natural rhythms instead of forcing yourself into rigid structures that do not fit your life. What we're going to explore today is grounded in peer reviewed research from psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral science. These aren't just theories or opinions, they're evidence based principles that have been tested, replicated, and shown to create real, measurable changes in people's lives. How habits work. Let's start by understanding what habits are because there's a lot of mythology around this that keeps people stuck in shame cycles that obviously are not serving them. Habits are automatic responses to contextual cues that develop through repeated behavior in stable environments. This definition comes from a comprehensive research by Wendy Wood and colleagues, published in the 2016 in the Annual Review of Psychology, one of the most respected psychology journals in the field. Wood's research analyzed decades of habit formation studies and synthesized what we know about how habits work. So, what does this mean in practical terms? It means that habits form when you repeat a behavior in the same context over and over until your brain starts to automate the response. The key word here is context. You're not just repeating an action, you're repeating it in relationship to specific cues in your environment, specific times of day, specific emotional states, specific places. Think about when you brush your teeth. It's just a habit that you do every single day, one that's been ingrained into you since you were a child. So you always do it, whether you do it first thing in the morning when you wake up or immediately after you have breakfast, or like when you're getting ready to go to bed. Maybe you take an evening shower and then you brush your teeth in the shower, or right before you go to bed. This all of these specific times, and this matters. So your brain is always trying to conserve energy and reduce cognitive load. Decision making requires energy. Every time you have to consciously think about what to do next, your brain is working. Habits reduce the need for constant decision making. Once a behavior becomes habitual, your brain can run it automatically while you focus your conscious attention elsewhere. Think back to that toothbrushing. You don't really ever think, oh, I still have to go and do this. It's just something that is probably happening already throughout your day. This is why habits are so powerful. When movement becomes habitual, you don't have to fight yourself every morning of whether you're going to stretch or go for a walk. When mindful eating becomes habitual, you don't have to use willpower every single meal. This behavior runs on autopilot, triggered by the context that you've created. Benjamin Gardner and colleagues published research in 2019 examining the evidence base for habit formation interventions. They found that repetition in the same context strengthens automaticity. Every single time you do a behavior in response to the same cue, you're strengthening the neural pathway that connects that cue to that behavior. This is how habits become automatic. Think about if you have a garage. When you pull out of the driveway, you probably automatically, when you're backing out, go to hit that button to bring the garage door back down. It's probably not even something that you really have to think about anymore. Sometimes you might even think, oh, I wonder if I did that, but you did it because it was an automatic trigger. Something that gets left out of habit conversations, though, is that your motivation is going to fluctuate, but context carries behavior forward. You will not feel motivated every single day. You will have days when you're tired, stressed, and overwhelmed. When the last thing you want to do is the thing you've been trying to make a habit. And on those days, if you're relying on motivation alone, it's probably not going to have much follow through. But if you've built up the contextual cues, if you've anchored the behavior to a specific time, place, or routine, the context itself will prompt the behavior even when motivation is low. You'll find yourself doing the thing almost without thinking about it because the environmental trigger is there. The research also shows that something really important about the size of these actions. Small actions are easier for the brain to repeat consistently. So it's not about being lazy or not trying hard enough. This is about how your brain actually works. Smaller behaviors require less cognitive effort, less decision making energy, less activation to initiate. They're easier to fit into your existing life, they create less resistance. Philippa Lally and colleagues published highly cited research in 2013 in Health Psychology, examining what actually promotes habit formation. Their review provides tools for intervention developers, for practitioners, for anyone trying to support behavior change. And one of their key findings is that initiating new behaviors is easier when those behaviors are small and simple. You can always build on a small habit once it's been established. But if you start too big with too much complexity, too much change all at once, you'll likely abandon it before it ever becomes automatic. So you don't need to overhaul your entire life. We start with just one thing. The takeaway here is repetition builds reliability, not perfection, not constant motivation, not massive effort. Repetition in context consistently over time is what creates habits that last. Cues, stress, and the nervous system. Now, let's talk about something that doesn't always get addressed in mainstream habit formation advice: the role of your nervous system and whether these behaviors stick or don't. Habits are often triggered by time, place, emotion, or environment. These are your contextual cues. Maybe you always have your coffee at 7 a.m., and that becomes a cue. Maybe you always stretch in your living room, and entering that room becomes a cue. Maybe you feel anxious and you automatically reach for your phone, and that emotional state becomes a cue. Wood's 2016 research emphasizes that habits form through associative learning. Your brain links a context with a response. Over time, the context alone is enough to trigger the behavior without a conscious thought. But where it gets interesting and where understanding your nervous system becomes essential, stress increases reliance on habitual responses and reduces cognitive flexibility. When you're stressed, your nervous system is activated. You default to whatever patterns are most automatic. But if you've built healthy supportive habits, stress will push you toward those patterns. You'll automatically do the thing that helps you to regulate. But if your automatic patterns are ones that create more stress or disconnect, stress will push you toward those instead. This is backed by Wood's research and also by more recent work from Mansani Tingray, published in 2025 in the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research. Tingray's research on transforming habits emphasizes that stress affects our ability to engage in deliberate behavior change. When your nervous system is dysregulated, you don't have the same access to executive function, to planning, to conscious choice. So what this means practically, Pushing harder under stress often disrupts consistency. If you're already in a stress state and you try to force yourself into new behaviors through willpower alone, you're working against your nervous system. You're asking your brain to do something it's not designed to do when it's in a threat state. The alternative is to recognize that soothing responses support regulation and follow through. When you can bring your nervous system into a more regulated state, when you can activate your parasympathetic nervous system, your capacity for intentional behavior increases. You have access to the parts of your brain that can make conscious choices rather than defaulting to automatic stress responses. This is why practices like breath work, gentle movement, grounding techniques, they're not separate from habit formation. They're foundational to it. When your nervous system feels safe, you have more capacity to engage in new behaviors, to override old patterns, to stay consistent even when things are hard. Let's pause here and practice something together. We're going to do a simple nervous system regulation practice that you can use anytime you're trying to build a new habit and you notice stress or resistance arising. Place your feet flat on the floor. Feel the contact beneath your feet and the ground. Take a slow breath in through your nose, counting to 4. Hold for a moment. And then exhale slowly through your mouth, counting to 6. The longer exhale activates your parasympathetic nervous system, signaling to your body that it's safe to rest and restore. Do this a few more times on your own. In for 4, out for 6. Notice if anything shifts in your body, your mind, or in the quality of tension that you're holding. This is regulation. This is creating the internal state that supports consistency. You're not forcing yourself to do the hard thing. You're creating the conditions where the hard thing becomes more accessible. The takeaway: regulation supports consistency. When you tend to your nervous system, when you work with your body's natural stress responses instead of pushing through them every time, habits become sustainable rather than another source of pressure. Small habits create sustainable change. Here's where we address one of the biggest misconceptions about behavior change: the belief that bigger efforts create bigger results. The research tells us something completely different. Small, consistent behavioral changes are far more effective than large, infrequent efforts. This comes from Lally's 2013 research and is reinforced by a 2023 meta-analysis published by Haoming Ma and colleagues in the International Journal of Behavioral Nutrition and Physical Activity. Ma's research analyzed multiple studies specifically examining physical activity habit formation interventions. They found that habit formation interventions effectively foster physical activity habits, and one of their key findings is that problem-solving techniques show a positive association with habit strength, while social reward actually reduces effectiveness. So let me break that down. Problem-solving techniques means helping people identify barriers and figure out concrete solutions. If you notice you're not doing your morning stretch routine because you forget, the problem-solving approach is to set a visible reminder or an anchor to something that you're already doing. If you notice you're skipping your walk because it's too cold, the problem-solving approach is to identify what would make it accessible. Maybe walking indoors or having warm clothes ready to go. Maybe it's investing into a walking pad. Maybe if you have the space around your house, you're just walking from room to room for a while. This works because you're addressing the real obstacles rather than just trying harder. You're making the behavior easier to do, lowering the friction, removing the barriers that block consistency. The finding about social reward is interesting and goes against a lot of popular habit advice. External rewards, praise from others, social recognition, these can actually undermine the habit formation because they shift your motivation from intrinsic to extrinsic. You start doing the behavior for the reward rather than because it's become automatic and it feels good to you just to be doing the thing instead of for the recognition. But then when the reward goes away, so does the behavior. Tiny actions lower resistance and increase repetition. When you make a habit so small that it almost feels silly to be doing, like doing one push up or writing one sentence or stretching for just 1 minute, there's no mental resistance there. You're not arguing with yourself about whether you have time or the energy, you just do it. And then what happens, consistency strengthens habit pathways over time. Every repetition, no matter how small, is building that neural connection between cue and behavior. You're training your brain to automate the response. Research published in 2025 by M. Shadat and colleagues in the World Journal of Advanced Research examined how small incremental changes can foster sustainable behavior change and improve quality of life across various domains. Their literature review emphasizes that small changes create big impact over time precisely because they're sustainable. You can maintain them. You don't burn out. You don't abandon them when life gets hard. The other key finding from Ma's research is that problem solving supports habit strength more than pressure. When you approach habit formation with curiosity about what's getting in the way, when you troubleshoot the barriers that you're facing, you are building habits that can last. When you approach it with self criticism and force, you create internal resistance that undermines your consistency. Progress compounds quietly. You don't see dramatic changes day to day. But when you look back over weeks and months, when you realize you've been doing something consistently that used to feel impossible, that's when you see this power of small habits. The takeaway here is that small actions add up. Start smaller than what feels significant, and then build that consistency, and then build on that foundation. Habit stacking and daily anchors. So, practical evidence based strategies for actually implementing new habits in your life. Habit stacking. Linking new behaviors to existing routines strengthens habit formation. This principle comes from research by Daniela Beretta and colleagues published in 2024 in Applied Psychology, Health and Well-Being. Their study, called Habit Walk, was a micro randomized trial specifically designed to understand and promote habit formation in physical activity. What they found is that commitment combined with prompts and cues are effective habit promotion strategies when delivered together. In other words, when you make a commitment to do a specific behavior at a specific time and you have environmental cues that prompt that behavior, you're much more likely to follow through. And critically, this combination promotes both habit strength and actual behavior, meaning you do it more consistently and it becomes more automatic. So, what does habit stacking actually look like in practice? It means taking a behavior that you already do consistently, something that's already habitual, and linking your new behavior directly to it. Existing habits provide reliable cues. You don't have to remember to do the established behavior because it's already automatic. When you attach the new behavior to it, the existing habit becomes the trigger for the new one. For example, you already brush your teeth in the morning. That's an established automatic cue. You could stack a new habit by saying, after I brush my teeth, I will take 3 deep breaths. After is the key word. You're creating a clear sequence where completing one behavior immediately triggers the next. Maybe you already make coffee every morning. After you press start on the coffee maker, you do 1 minute standing stretches while it brews. The existing routine of making coffee becomes the anchor for the new routine of stretching. Gardner and colleagues published research in 2021 in Psychology and Health that outlines 21 research questions to guide future work on habit formation, habit disruption, and habit-based health behavior change interventions. One of their key areas of focus is understanding how to effectively link new behaviors to existing routines because the research consistently shows that this strategy works. Stacking reduces the effort of remembering. You're not relying on willpower or motivation. You're not trying to remember to do the new thing at some vague point during the day. The established behavior is the reminder. When you do X, you do Y. Simple, clear, and reliable. Short practices fit more easily into your daily life. When you're stacking habits, you want the new behavior to be brief enough that it doesn't disrupt the flow of your existing routine. If your new habit takes 30 minutes and your established routine was 2 minutes, you're going to create some resistance there. But if your new habit takes 1 to 3 minutes, it slides right into that existing pattern without feeling like a burden. Familiar routines increase follow through. There's safety in familiarity. Your brain knows what to expect. When you leverage that existing pattern, you're working with your brain's preference for predictability rather than against it. Some examples of habit stacks that can work well. After I pour my morning water, I will take my supplements. After I sit down at my desk, I will write 3 things that I'm grateful for. After I change into comfortable clothes after work, I will do 5 minutes of gentle movement. After I turn off the lights at night, I place one hand on my heart and take 3 slow breaths. Notice the structure here. After I, existing habit, I will, new habit. Clear, specific, and linked. Anchor new habits to what already exists. Use the reliability of established patterns to build new ones. Reflection and self-compassion. Now we're going to bring everything together and by talking about something that's completely missing from habit formation advice, the role of self-compassion and reflection in sustaining behavior change. Self-compassion supports adaptive coping and sustained behavior change. This comes from research by Melanie Monroe and colleagues published in 2021 in the Journal of Psychological Trauma. Their study examined how self-compassion and problem-focused coping strategies like active coping and instrumental support contribute to post-traumatic growth in trauma survivors. What they found is that self-compassion isn't just about feeling better emotionally. It's a practical skill that supports your ability to cope with difficulty and maintain positive behaviors even in the face of challenges. When you can be kind to yourself when things are hard, you're more likely to keep going instead of giving up. So, how does this apply to habit formation? Well, let's start with the reflection piece. Reflection turns experience into information. When you pause to notice what happened, when you ask yourself curious questions instead of judging yourself, you will learn what works for you and what doesn't. Maybe you notice that you consistently skip your evening routine on nights when you work late. That's information. You're not a failure. You just discovered that your evening routine needs to be flexible enough to accommodate late work nights, or that you need an alternative routine for those days. Maybe you notice that you always follow through with movement when you do it first thing in the morning, but when you plan for it later in the day, it rarely happens. Again, this is information. Your body has a rhythm. Mornings work for you. You can design your habits around that reality instead of fighting it. Missed days reveal patterns, not failure. That is so important to understand. When you approach habit formation with self-compassion, you see a missed day as data. Well, what got in the way? What was happening in your body, your life, or your nervous system that made this behavior inaccessible? How can you adjust to make it more sustainable? And this is completely different from the shame-based approach most of us have internalized, where missing a day means you failed, you've broken your streak, you might as well give up. That approach doesn't work. It creates internal pressure that actually undermines your consistency. Kindness supports nervous system safety. When you can be gentle with yourself about your imperfections, when you can acknowledge that you're human and some days are harder than others, your nervous system stays regulated. You're not adding the stress of self-criticism on top of whatever else you're dealing with. And what the research shows us, awareness guides meaningful adjustment. When you pay attention without judgment, when you notice patterns with curiosity, you gain the information you need to make your habits actually fit your life. So, here are some reflective questions you can use to support your habit practice. What made it easier to follow through today? What got in the way? How did my body feel when I did this behavior? What would make this more accessible tomorrow? What am I learning about what works for me? Notice that none of these questions are accusatory. You're not asking yourself why you failed or what's wrong with you. You're gathering information. You're being a compassionate observer of your own experience. There's also powerful research on how self-compassion specifically supports growth. The Monroe study found that self-compassion combined with problem-focused coping strategies contributes to post-traumatic growth. When you can be kind to yourself and actively problem solve, you build resilience and capacity. This applies directly to habit formation. You need both kindness to not give up when things are hard and the practical problem solving to address the actual barriers that you face. Let's pause and do a brief reflection practice together. Think about a habit you've been trying to build. Now take a breath. Ask yourself with genuine curiosity, what's one thing that would make this easier? Not what you should do, not what you think you're supposed to do, but what would actually make this more accessible for you in your real life with your real constraints. Listen for the answer. Trust what arises. It is your wisdom. That's the information that will help you to create sustainable change. The takeaway: kindness keeps you engaged. When you approach habit formation with self-compassion and reflective awareness, you build habits that last because you're working with yourself instead of against yourself. Let's bring this all together. We've explored how habits work, how they're built through repetition and stable context. We've looked at the role of stress and nervous system regulation and consistency. We've talked about the power of starting small and using problem solving instead of pressure. We've explored habit stacking as a practical strategy for implementation, and we've grounded it all in self-compassion and reflection. The research is clear. Sustainable habit formation is possible when you work with your brain and nervous system instead of fighting them. When you start small, build contextual cues, regulate your stress responses, and meet yourself with kindness when things don't go perfectly. What I want you to take with you: you are not broken if your habits have felt impossible before. You are likely working against your own biology, using strategies that create resistance rather than ones that support sustainable change. The invitation now is to choose one small habit that you want to build, just one, and make it tiny. Make it so small that it almost feels way too easy. Then identify the anchor, the existing routine you'll link it to, and commit to reflection without judgment, to noticing what happens, to adjusting as you learn. This is how change happens. Small actions repeated consistently, held in compassion. You don't need to overhaul your entire life. You need to understand how your brain works and design your habits accordingly. You've got everything you need. The research backs you up. Your nervous system is on your side when you work with it, and the capacity for sustainable change is already within you, waiting to be activated through intentional, compassionate practice. Start small, start today, trust the process, and be kind to yourself along the way. Thank you for being here, for showing up, for choosing to learn how to work with yourself instead of against yourself. That's what this is really about. Honoring your humanity, trusting your capacity, and rebuilding the life you want, one small intentional action at a time. Move with intention, build strength with purpose. These words aren't just about physical movement or habit formation, they're about how you walk through your life. Every choice you make with awareness, every pattern you build with care, every moment you meet yourself with compassion is intention. That's purpose, and that is strength. You already have everything you need within you. Now you have the tools to bring it forward sustainably, kindly, and in ways that will last. Go gently, trust the process, and remember, small actions repeated with care change everything.